Welcome to our Careers in Peacebuilding Talk Story series. My name is Jose Barzola from the Matanang Institute for Peace here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Our talk story today will focus on building culture and conflict resilience, which equals good business, with Vince Abramo and ulani Keohokalole. Thank you for joining us to learn about the journey into the profession. Our co-sponsor is Bamboo Shoot, that is founded by one of our speakers, Vince, who supports the mission of businesses and nonprofits to fulfill communities' needs. She has a degree in public administration and happens to be an alum of our grad certificate in conflict resolution. So always great to bring back an alumni. Also has a certificate in nonprofit management and volunteer management. Also joining us today is ulani, who has established People Strategies Hawaii in 2019 with the vision of growing the capacity of organizations to foster community-minded and people-oriented leaders. She trains, consults, and supports organizations across sectors and industries who are looking to transform around the ways they engage people to achieve their mission. ulani was grounded in the traditional Native Hawaiian cultural practice of ho'oponopono by her grandmother, who was a community-based practitioner. The art of reconciliation and making things right guides her approach to facilitation and consultation with organizations, stemming from the belief that clients hold the answers to their own challenges, that who shows up and how they show up matters, and that waiting for the moment is key. So, and to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to ulani. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm just really excited to be part of this and sharing some thoughts with you all. So let me go ahead and get my slides up. Oh, not share it. Sorry, give me 1 second. All right, here we go. So, today's session is about building culture and conflict resolution. And I'll be talking about the building culture part, and then Vince will join in and talk about conflict resilience. But, you know, one of the first things that I think Jose already shared is that my background is in nonprofit work. And as a child, I would often accompany my grandmother, who was a ho'oponopono practitioner in the community, and really see the ways that she helped to support families, especially grandparents who are raising their grandchildren by themselves. And I think that instilled in me a sense of healing and reconciliation. And that carries into the work I do with organizations. I never thought I'd be doing this type of work, or even think about ho'oponopono in this way, but there absolutely is a lot to be done in institutions in the way that their cultures are. So we're going to be talking about culture. And the first question I have for all of you is, what is culture? When we say organizational culture, what comes to mind for you? And please use the chat, or if you're in Zoom, you can unmute and share your thoughts. But how would you define culture? Any thoughts?
I would say shared beliefs between people of certain communities or certain backgrounds.
Yeah. I see sets of practices, shared ways of doing things, a set of values and beliefs. My short answer. Yes, all of those are true. So here's one definition that we can use. Culture is the collection of values, expectations, and practices, like you folks said, that guide and inform the actions of all team members. And as I go through this presentation, I'm going to be kind of giving you some tips that I use to help build good, healthy culture as an organizational development consultant. So the first thing that we think of when we think of culture is a lot of the norms, right? The norms, the protocols, and this is taken from Kamehameha schools, but right, we think about the ways of doing things, the ways that things get done. And I think in ethnic cultures, it's very, very clear that there are a lot of norms, a lot of rituals and things that define what a culture is. And organizations absolutely have their own cultures. When you think about, for example, going to Walmart versus going to Target, you can sort of start to see what are the differences in the ways that these stores have set themselves up, the feeling that you get when you're in them. And that's very true when it comes to organizations. A lot of times when someone is first hired, the way their orientation happens, the way they're onboarding, the way people treat them, the water cooler conversations, all of that starts to help folks figure out, okay, this is the culture that I'm stepping into in this organization. So the first kind of tip I have for folks thinking about this work is to really think about what is the culture that my organization has. And I know some of you might be independent and you might be working outside of organizations. It's really important, no matter if you're inside or outside, to kind of take that investigator hat, or think of yourself as like a secret shopper, right? And try to think about what are those norms, practices, patterns that I see going on in this organization. So you really want to get your hands around what is that culture that we're seeing here. And again, to use the Walmart and Target analogy, it's important to help especially define it against something else. So, you know, what is this culture versus another organization I've worked with? I came from the nonprofit world. When I went into corporate structure, it became very clear to me how those cultures were different. So you want to really get your hands around what is that culture that your organization has. The second thing to keep in mind is that values drive culture. And these can be either the stated values or perhaps the unwritten values, the things that just become clear as the more you are with an organization and you realize, oh, wow, this is something they really prioritize, it's something they invest in, they put money around, they tend to put their focus on. Those all give you hints at what those values are. And so you want to be clear about understanding the values that your organization espouses to. So in thinking about that, oops, let me go back one. A lot of organizations have what they call their core values, right? And we can see those on the wall. When we get hired, we see those in the new hire orientation usually. And I'm going to talk about the difference between stated values and then what actually goes on in organizations. So to use this example, I'm curious how many of us, and I can't see hands, but maybe you can write it in the chat and Jose can help me out. How many of you have a stated value of getting 8 hours of sleep? For how many of you is that a priority or a value? Waking up refreshed, feeling good. I see Vince has a thumbs up. Jose, how about you? Is that a value for you? Yes, I see yes in the chat. So for a lot of us, it is a stated value. We value getting enough sleep. Now, for how many of you is this your action or behavior at night? I know it's mine very, very often. I'm up late, I'm watching whatever, YouTube, TikTok, things like that. And so my action and behavior does not align to the value that I say I have, right? If I really meant it in terms of having that 8 hours of sleep, oh, let me go back one, then my action and behavior would look something like, oh, I guess my picture is gone, would look something like someone really going to bed early and making sure that I get enough sleep. So my point there is that often there's what's said as our stated values, and then there's how it actually shows up, right? And if it shows up in the way that we behave within the organization. So I wanted to, oh, there we go. This would be me if I was serious about my value. There's my picture. So I wanted to share an image that might help us think more about this alignment, right? We really want to examine whether is there alignment between what we say our values are and the way that people get work done in this organization, right? And so, sorry, I think somehow this is skipping some of my images. So let me just refresh for a second. Here we go. So I wanted to share this image with you all. And when you think about kalo, right, there's the leaves that you see above the surface, and then there's the roots. And then there's the actual taro that you eat later on when you huki and you harvest it. So the things above the surface are all the things we can see about an organization's culture. And that's where we have those core value statements, our mission, our vision, the things that we say, right? Maybe some of our policies or our strategies are up on our website. And we talk a lot about all of these things about our organization. And then there's all the stuff that we can't see so much. That's the unwritten rules, the behaviors, the attitudes and feelings. And I believe as mediators, you're dealing with a lot of this stuff. You're dealing with all the, the how people feel, how it translates in terms of human interactions, dynamics, and relationships. And at the end of it, we see the results. We see the harvest, and how does that translate in terms of the way we treat our customers, our stakeholders, whether we actually get revenue from the work we're doing or not, the impact that we're having. So, the point of this image is that it's about all of it. If we're going to do this work, it's not just about making sure we have all the pretty stuff up above. It's making sure that at our core, at the roots, that we are taking care of those things and that they're aligned. I'll give you an example. I'm working with an organization right now that has both a for-profit and a nonprofit component. And the nonprofit has like this really, really amazing mission that gets so many people to come work for them. But the for-profit side is very more profit driven. And in some ways, the decisions they make on that side of the house actually seem in conflict with what they say is their mission. And I've started as a organizational development consultant to distinguish that and say, hey, wait a minute, these things are in conflict with each other. What you say you're about and what you actually do are kind of not, two different things. So you really want to examine whether the organization is aligned between, between its visible culture and then its invisible culture. So they want to examine that alignment. The next piece is developing a vision for the culture that you want. So if you have a good handle on what that culture is, and then you've examined whether, do our values actually inform what we're doing? Is there alignment between what we say our values are and how we show up? The next is to say, okay, yeah, there's a few gaps in these areas. And so we really want to create a solid vision for where we want to go. And I'm just going to give you this as an example. It doesn't have to be your model that you use for your organization, but just one that I use as a generic one is thinking about these 4 quadrants in terms of what a healthy culture should look like, how employees should experience it, right? So the first is that they feel empowered. And that would look like being included and given voice in things that impact them. It might mean breaking down silos. I work with a number of organizations where it's very hierarchical and you have to go across to someone, up to your manager, across to the other manager, just to be able to talk to another employee in a different department. The second is that you're supported. So you're led by people who really believe in inclusion and believe in equity and support you to do your best work. Then you think about being respected. And I apologize, my visuals are acting a little funky today. But that you're respected, you're given trust, right? During the pandemic, I had a number of managers coming to me saying, well, how am I going to track if my person's working from home, whether they're on Netflix or not? And my question was, do you trust them? Did you hire employees that you trust, right? We have to give people a sense of, we trust them to do their best work. Not minimalizing them or tokenizing them, but really giving them that safety to speak openly when they need to, and really just to treat them as thoughtful and capable contributors. And then the last is that, and again, sorry about my visuals acting funky. The last is that they feel engaged. So they feel encouraged to really bring their whole selves, they're accountable, they feel celebrated and rewarded and recognized. And ultimately, you want those people being champions of your organization outside. You really want your employees being ambassadors. I remember talking to a recruiter once who said, I wouldn't even tell my best friends to come work for this organization. And I thought, oh man, you're the recruiter. So you really want people, kind of drinking the Kool-Aid and proud of working for your organization. So this might be one way of thinking about what's that vision. If we really were a healthy organization, what would that look like? How would we be able to measure and evaluate that? And this might be one way to look at that. Yeah. Sorry about the visual, they're just acting funky, sorry. And then the last piece I would say is, once you have defined that vision, you know where you want to go, then it's creating goals and strategies that'll help foster it. And this is where I think some organizations get stuck because they feel overwhelmed by how much they need to do and perhaps how far they are from that vision. And if this helps you, this is just a very kind of generic model in thinking about organizations and how they're designed and structured. But you could break it down into these areas, right? So thinking about people, how do we grow our people? How do we recruit the best people? How do we promote them, develop them, inspire them? Then thinking about rewards, how do we reward our people? How do we recognize the good behaviors that we want to see, right? The going to bed early versus the being on our phones late at night. How do we reward those good behaviors? Then processes, thinking about, okay, do some of our processes make it hard for people to do their best work? Do we need to streamline? Do we need to, possibly modernize some of our processes, right? Then what's our strategies? Do our strategies align to what we say we're about, right? So using that for-profit, nonprofit organization I was telling you about, does our strategy for making revenue, does it align or does it come into conflict with our values, right? How do we re-examine that? And then lastly, thinking about our structure. Are we structured in such a way that people really can thrive, or is our structure maybe a barrier because we're very hierarchical or very siloed, things like that. And all of that starts to inform the culture that you want to have. So if it helps, try to break it down into these areas. And even I tell people, just tackle one area, like start with rewards, maybe, what are we going to do for rewards and recognition, or start with processes. But find a place where you can start to make some good leverage and influence that culture that you want to have. Okay, I know that was a lot and I'm out of time, but I wanted to ask for your thoughts and your reflections on one thing that you think you can do to influence organizational culture. And I will say, I've been both inside and outside organizations, and there's pros and cons to both in terms of moving culture. Obviously, as an outsider, there's only so much I can do. Oops, this thing is just on a timer or something, I think. But even as an outsider, I think one of the values if you are outside, one of the values you can add is really kind of, again, that, I hate to use the term, but like that secret shopper kind of mindset of really helping the organization see what it might not see. Part of when organizations have a really strong culture, part of the problem is that it's like a fish in water. It's fish don't realize they're in water. They're just in it. They're swimming around. They don't think of it as water. We're often not thinking about air or oxygen because we're just kind of in it. So part of what you can provide as an outsider is to say, hey, I'm noticing this, or I see your core value is aloha on your website, but I don't really see that being practiced, or I see some things in conflict with that. So that's something that you really can offer as someone who's outside an organization. I think inside, you can be a champion. You can help to engage your fellow colleagues and to say, hey, what can we do, to try and better embody this? What can we do to talk to leaders, to get employee voice? So there's a lot that you can do on both sides. But I've been talking a lot, so I'd love to hear from you folks, maybe one thing that you think you can do to influence culture from where you stand. Any thoughts? Okay, so I'll share one thought. Talking about it, because we don't often talk about it, right? So again, starting off the conversation about what is the culture we have here? And even just starting to ask some of those questions. I like that, Pamela. Yeah, maintain vigilance in looking for both alignment and misalignment. Yeah. And one of the best ways that you can, if you're not sure what the culture is to ask a new hire, someone who just came in, right? Maybe give them, a month or so, or maybe after their 90 days, ask them, hey, what's the culture that you're observing here? Again, what do we say? Our values, beliefs, norms, practices, right? What are they seeing? And what do they think the values are that drive the culture there? It would be very interesting to hear their take on it. Yeah. Yeah, Raju, I see you have a question or thought.
Thank you, Kuliani. Just a question I have is, how long does it take culture to set in place? How long does it take for these habits to take root and become a part of the everyday way of living?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have a specific timeline, per se. But what I've seen is that culture comes through repeated patterns, right? So, what do they say? It takes 15 days to break a habit, something like that, or 15 days to establish a habit or break a habit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's 15 days, but I will say, when when you kind of hit that tipping point of you've repeated something over and over and over to the point where it's not just one person doing it, but several people are starting to do it, that's the point where you're starting to create a culture. And what's interesting is I've worked with startup organizations who are brand new. We're talking like maybe a year old. And even as an outsider walking in and talking to them and seeing the way they do things, I have a good sense of what their culture is, whether they've even spent the time to define it or not. Again, it comes through repeated patterns. So it's either what you kind of intentionally create, or it's what you allow to happen. It's just what, if after a while I've said that I'm really trying to lose weight, but I keep eating fast food every day, right? At some point, it's what I've allowed to happen. It's the culture that I'm creating, whether I know it or not. So I don't know if that answers your question. There's not really a specific time frame, but especially when it comes to shifting culture, I have found that really it's like 3 to 5 years is where you really start seeing tangible differences. So it's not an overnight thing, it takes time.
No, that was very, very, very helpful to realize it does take time to change a culture, to put it in place, to see the results, and you got to stay with it. You got to stay with it.
Yep. Yeah, thank you.
Mahalo.
Mahalo. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
I would add to what you said in response to his question is, when does things start to normalize? It's an expectation that this is who we are and what we do. So however long, and everybody's in agreement or doing the bubblehead like you're doing. Like every time something goes, like everybody starts agreeing that this is okay and it's becoming normalized is what we do. And that's an indication that you're shifting into that culture, that way of being or doing things.
Yeah. That's a great question too. Yeah, I don't, I guess.
Because sometimes people are very convincing, or what do you call it? When someone is able to convince others and rally people around an idea, and then it just becomes kind of a group thing, and that's translated in what people do, and it's expected because everybody's in agreement.
Yep. I think you're just reminding me, I don't really have an answer to your question, but you are reminding me that it's really important, if you are trying to shift culture, it's really important to think about, where are you trying to go? And then how are you going to evaluate once you get there? Like to your point about when are we normalized? Like when is this now who we are? You need to have some way to check that, whether it's in evaluating employee behaviors. Like I've worked with organizations to actually put the values in the annual performance evaluation. So we are literally evaluating whether people are embodying the values that we want them to have, or whether it's like, checking it against new hires, asking them, but you gotta have some way to evaluate it and measure it. Otherwise, yeah, how will you know when you get there, right? So that's a great point. Raju, I see you have your hand up again.
Yeah, actually, this kind of goes into a question that I have when you said, how do you know you get there, on discernment? How do you discern between what is healthy culture and what's unhealthy culture? And can you stop another group of people, or if someone sees that as unhealthy culture, can it be stopped, or do they have the right to live out their culture the way they want to, even though it might be hurtful and it might be detrimental and may hurt other people around, but do they have the right to live out their designed culture?
Yeah. One thing that I've had to, so I got to share, my grandmother and my mother were social workers. And so often I find myself in the helping business. But sometimes that veers into like the fixing business, right? And I try to be very cognizant, and I think this would be good for all of us in this type of work, is to be very cognizant when we are trying to fix or drive or save an organization from itself. We have to realize that as individuals, we can be influential, but we cannot ourselves force a culture to change, right? So I think we get into dangerous territory when we say, hey, this organization's doing harmful work and I have to go over there and fix it. One of the key things is that there needs to be a willingness, like anything else, right? Like quitting smoking or anything else. There has to be a readiness and a willingness to acknowledge what's going on and to make a difference and to change. And in some cases, I work with organizations where they're just kind of not willing to. They're just happy with, hey, we're raking in all these profits. Our customers are happy, so it's not broke, why fix it, kind of thing. And we can only do our best to influence and to make the case. And going back to that quadrants of, hey, we're noticing employees are disengaged, they're quitting, they're leaving. You can only kind of make the case, and then at some point you decide, okay, this organization's not ready, right? And so I try not to push an organization if it's not.
Okay, thank you. And the last question I have for you is, in your work with Ho'oponopono, how do you, is there a way, or I guess this is like a real far-fetched question, but how would you bring that to, say, two nations, two countries that were fighting each other? How could it be brought in a way that could be digested and really, wow, this is a way out for us to find a way out? Just your observations. Thank you.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a big one. I'll try to just keep it short. I think in Ho'oponopono, it's always about making sure that all the parties are wanting to participate, first of all. Again, same like what I was just saying, you can't force anyone to do it. And the second is figuring out what are those shared values that can bring people to the table. So it's not about one country's set of values or the others, but really what do we all hold in common that brings us together? What's the overlap, right? And then kind of driving from there. So, and I think Vince will talk much more about conflict resilience and readiness. So with that, I'm just going to leave you with my contact information. And I know at the end, we'll also see if anyone has any questions.
Thank you for answering those questions. I appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ku'ulani. So she's my little partner in crime. I strung her along on this. She's like, what's this all about? And I needed to include her because of the work she does for the different organizations in Hawaii. And you do the mainland as well, right, Ku'ulani? Yes, yes. So she's amazing. And I wanted to put a lens on conflict resilience, especially when we're creating or designing dispute resolution systems for organizations. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. Hope everyone can see this. So I've been creating a culture of a conflict resilient community, and it's been an interesting work being in this field. And I like to discover things and I like to uncover things with a lot of these organizations. And of course, we're building consensus, but I also was curious about individual goals. And I do support small businesses and small individuals with coaching, training, and facilitation. I also assist nonprofits through volunteer scaling. And you can recognize some faces there. But I wanted to let you know why I started also doing coaching and training with these organizations. So I have my certification with John Maxwell, as well as neuroencoding under Tony Robbins, and also Dr. Amen clinics. I discovered a lot of things that were not being said in these facilitations, and that a lot of them were introverts. So I'm currently working with a company that is full of introverts, and things were not being said in these facilitations. And the other thing was, I recognized that it was a very unhealthy culture. They sometimes the main owner would criticize people and chastise people in front of other staff members. And I was thinking, that's not healthy. And that's when I really looked at, maybe I should provide training for them on what healthy communication looks like. So I wanted to let you know the key takeaways of what my method is. Of course, we know facilitation, and I do offer training, and I also coach individuals. And of course, we know that facilitating organizations, the principle is engagement, and we work with equity and practice the structure and guide dialogues, meetings, and events into the decision-making processes. And we have other activities that are intentional strategies that help the group converse and collaborate more respectfully and productively. And the purpose is to have them focus on the group process, and that the way the group works together to perform tasks, make decisions, and solve problems. And I explored some things that were different about these organizations. Individuals came to me at first when I started my practice. This bamboo shoot is about 5 years now. And I provided training because the training, what I observed was that the people were relearning a lot of these communication skills, active listening, and they were able to boost their participation in facilitation. And the group is held to an understanding of what was learned in the training. And I felt like, wow, this is actually amazing. And I also implement a lot of the coaching techniques. And I was very curious about the goals of the owner and discovering the areas of growth and how that the owner can improve as a leader. And what are their challenges? And I want to celebrate their accomplishments because they're an owner of a business. That's so amazing. What do they want to improve, or how do they want to retain their employees? I just got off a call with a communication practitioner. She's a communication coach on the East Coast. And a lot of the manufacturing companies have trouble hiring people and retaining people. Those are the two things that are brought up. And time again, a lot of the feedback from those employees that are exiting, they are leaving because of poor communication. And I want to know what they want to do to improve their leadership skills that they want to like and have. And how many of us have worked only with the owner or the director of the organizations or the companies? And I felt guilty of that. I was guilty of that. And I wanted to know what the goals of the group was and the individuals. So I started the coaching part of it and learning about what their professional goals were. And they also shared with me what their personal goals and how it ties into their professional goals. And yes, I offer recognition when I do these organizational facilitations. And a lot of times the owner is looking for issues or problems they want to fix. And we don't recognize those accomplishments, no matter how small. And what I let people know is that when we train each person to celebrate, we form a neuron pathway in their brain to accomplish these goals. And they want to do more of these feel good things of getting to goals, and they want to be rewarded, no matter how small it is. And where to start if you wanted to do this in your practice? Of course, I provide assessments, and I found out a lot of these organizations have done like crystal reports, DISC assessment. I encourage them to take the Myers-Briggs, Thomas Kilmann. I also help them with the brain health. And they also do assessments of their businesses, but I encourage them to do SWOT analysis of their communication system. What is their strategic plan of how they communicate with each other? What is their key performance indicators when they are resolving conflicts? And I also simplify it as much as I can. Again, the basics of the communication and trying to train them and also practice active listening. And I provide easy access to coaching and ease the group into facilitation so it can turn into creating a dispute resolution system where everyone is involved. I constantly ask for feedback with individuals when I'm coaching them, and I ask for group feedback at the end of every facilitation and training. So I want to ask you to do that important work of ongoing group support and supporting the owner of the organization. I encourage them to take additional training for their staff outside of what I provide, and also for the individuals to join a group or an association. And I get them to assess their new ideas and to try it out, pilot out, stay with it, see what's working, and to really become the CSI in their organizations. What's working, what's not working, how can we make it better? Give it time to rest, give it time for people to understand what's going on, especially when it comes to creating a dispute resolution system. And finally, I'd like to let you know that I want you to all to support organizations in their facilitation of communication and offer training, especially in leadership, communication, and more. And maybe that component of coaching one-to-one is necessary in a lot of these organizations. It helped me gain a clearer picture of each person in the facilitation. I'd love to tap story and chat with you. This is my information. I do have workshops that I provide for free because I believe a lot of this knowledge and experience that we've all had as mediators, facilitators, as business owners, that we bring this into the world, especially when it comes to businesses and organizations that need to have this harmony and that they can get to either profits or to get to their clients faster, and they're able to provide the services that these people need. And I encourage you to check out my website. I have also an Eventbrite page where I'm going to be talking about increasing your influence for business owners and also dealing with difficult people. Thank you so much. I know I was quicker than Kule. But is there any questions?
Well, I just have to say thank you so much for sharing your, your approach to how you work with different organizations and people in general. And I think what speaks highly is just the relationship building that you both do and how essential that is to the work that you're doing. And as we talk about, we call this a careers in peace building. And I always define peace building as relationship building. It's the easiest way to kind of get people on the same page. And just then I ask them, what exactly are the essential skills you need to create some positive, healthy relationships? And so why can we not translate that into the organizations that we're involved in? Why does it only have to be like in the household or in our friend circles? So, I mean, especially we spend the majority of our time in these organizations. I think it'd be essential that there be a good balance of and some good wellness and yeah, it's just so thank you for what you do and from the culture perspective and from the various organizational perspectives and how they've assisted you. But I think we do have Kula, can you share more about brain health?
So I got into brain health because when I was working with Epic Ohana and working with the youth in foster care and getting the families together in the facilitation process, a lot of times I was questioning what's going on with this person. I mean, it may be drug use, PTSD, whatever it is, but I was really curious about their brain and what was functioning, what was not functioning. Why isn't their prefrontal cortex really working right now? So what is it about it that I'm not really understanding, and how can I get them there? What are some of the techniques that I can use during a facilitation, during a mediation? It was just so fascinating to me. And of course, it goes back to a healthy lifestyle, making sure that you're keeping in check with yourself. And some of the things that we react to, and that's my workshop on dealing with difficult people and how we can respond in a loving and kind way that is not firing off in the different parts of the brain for that other person. And I talk about the anterior cingulate a lot when it comes to facilitation, because that will be repeated over and over again in that person when I'm doing a mediation. And that I'm like, okay, there's got to be a different technique where I can approach this person. And I discovered in coaching where they're like, okay, you need to stop me when I'm repeating myself. You need to let me know that I'm doing that. And then some of them are not open to it. And they're very frank about it. And I'm like, okay, but we need to move on to like a solution now. So how do I work with you in this way? Or do you need someone else in the group to keep you accountable in that way? So that it's been so fascinating using those tools from brain health.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you.
I saw someone asked us in the chat about sharing an activity or exercise to help get started. So I have one called a values in action exercise. It's pretty simple. And actually I'll pull up a couple of slides because I have it handy because I just did this with an organization. Hopefully my slides behave this time. It was acting a little weird last time. So can you see this? Okay, so what it is again, sort of checking for that alignment. And I do this especially with organizations where there kind of has been some misalignment between what they say and what they do. And so the prompt questions is, how do we demonstrate our values to our stakeholders, whether that's customers, clients, beneficiaries, whomever your stakeholders are, to each other within the organization, and then broadly, how do we demonstrate it to our community at large? And again, I try to really push organizations not to focus on the fluffy stuff like getting a well-rested night's sleep, but to really talk about those behaviors. Are we staying up late at night on our phone, or are we actually going to bed? And so what I do as an example is I take whatever their value is. So for this organization, it was aloha, mutual respect. And I say, okay, what would you say if that was your value? Like what would be coming out of your mouth to your customers, to your colleagues, to your community? And then what would you do? Like, what could someone film you doing? Don't tell me like, oh, I would be a kind person. No, I want to know in behavior, like, and I love working with the people I find really good at this exercise are the administrative assistants because they're so specific about things like you would refill the copier with paper if you really had respect for your fellow colleagues, right? Stuff like that. And I know it sounds very trivial, but the point is to start to be clear about what these things look like in action. And that way you are able to evaluate whether you're doing it or not. When you make it as tangible as possible, it becomes easier to evaluate. So once you kind of engage the organization in this activity, there's all kinds of things you can do with it. You can then put it into training. You can then put it into performance evaluations, like I said earlier, to actually hold people accountable to it. But I found that just doing the exercise of what do our values look like in action and behavior can be really enlightening for a lot of people. Yeah, Vince?
That's awesome, Kulani. That's amazing. So I call it the 4 questions, and I apologize. I can't remember who the psychologist was who started this, but I will send it to Jose and send it out to all of you. But when you're in a meeting, when I talk to the organization that I'm doing the facilitation with, I talk about the 4 questions, and it's to do with what their behavior is, what they're thinking, what their thoughts are during the mediation or facilitation. And the first question, is it true? So the things that come out of people's mouths, like, is it true? Is it the thing that they're talking about really absolutely true? That's the second question. And the third question is, how do I feel right now with the thought that I'm thinking? For example, I'll model it. Oh, well, this person is such a bee and she gossips about me all the time. Is it true? Not all the time. Maybe she says things when I really make her angry. Is it absolutely true? No, she's not talking about me all the time. I mean, she has to do her work. And how do I feel with the thought when I am thinking about her being a bee? Well, I feel kind of horrible because I'm not really interacting with her. I'm not being a really good staff co-worker. And then finally, the 4th question is, how would you be without the thought? Well, I'd actually do my work and I wouldn't be concentrating on her, and I'd want to be working with her more and discover how I can collaborate with her. So those are the 4 questions that I use a lot to prepare them. Recognizing their strengths is really good, and having them know what they're willing to change with themselves and with the organization. And then I keep celebrating that growth in them, in their brain, and then with themselves and with their organization.
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've seen a lot is when it comes to problematic behavior, if it's coming from or came from one person in particular, I see the behavior being addressed to the group as a whole, as if it's the whole group's behavior rather than addressing that one person. And I feel like that's not very effective in helping to change anything or even just helping that person improve. And so I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel it's better to address that person or make it the whole group's problem?
So, and then I know Jose is looking at me because he was one of my instructors, by the way. I would call it a challenge. We always summarize, rephrase, and reframe. And if that person is not open to having a one-to-one with you, if they are willing to have to talk to another individual, maybe someone who is like in that role, if they're a supervisor, another person who owns a company that's similar, they should be in a group that can support them. And then if the group needs to address that, then having a meeting together and having an outside person like any of all of us that's a mediator, facilitator, to facilitate those questions and those, so it doesn't get heated. So all voices are heard. And so the owner or the business person or the leader doesn't feel like they're being attacked.
Yeah, if I could add just sometimes I find that happens a lot, what you're describing, Leah, where there's one person with problematic behavior. And so like they'll ask me to come in and do a training about a topic to the whole team when they know it's the one person who is
Yeah,
kind of acting up, and then that person maybe doesn't have the self-awareness to go,
yeah,
oh,
exactly.
and so it totally misses the mark, and everyone else is like frustrated because they're like, we know it's that person, and da da da. And so I just think I would say not only is that not effective, it can be dangerous, because then people feel like, okay, this is never going to get addressed, right? We're just going to dance around the issue and pretend it's everyone's issue. So on the flip side, though, I would say that sometimes behaviors that are allowed to foster for a long time are a symptom of what's going on in the culture in the organization, right? So it's a both and. It's addressing that problem behavior with the individual, but it's also looking at, okay, what's being allowed, like why is that behavior being allowed to exist? There must be something else going on. So yeah, does that help?
Yes.
And that's why I encourage coaching. If that person do coaching or even therapy, I'll walk them to therapy if they need it.
Thank you.
Any other question? One question that I have is, how do you, because what I found is sometimes the people that need to be at the table are not the ones coming to the table. Any tips or tricks on and then having to stumble onto the table?
Ulani.
Well, I guess I would say, are you talking about, for example, people who are impacted by decisions but don't have a voice? Or I guess the first question would be why, right? Is
Yeah.
do they not feel safe to speak up? Have they not been invited to be part of the
Well,
table, you know?
It's many times the people in leadership that I find that maybe will bring people together for, because sometimes it's just it looks great, professional development. It's a good check mark on our annual report, but then they themselves may not be at the table to have the dialogue equally.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good one. You know, I truly believe in being really strategic about the why we're doing things, right? And being clear about the purpose and who needs to be there. And for leaders, especially if you're doing any sort of training that has to do with the type of culture you're trying to create, whether it's better communication or conflict resilience or whatever it is, you need leaders to understand it and be able to embody and model it.
Yeah.
So it's not about, and I just went through this because we had all these talks about, okay, you know, this is the type of training we want and the experience we want to have in the workshop and blah, blah, blah. And we did that, and the leaders were on the side talking story while everyone else was doing the activities. And I'm like, no, this is not okay. So I think being very clear from the get-go of what you're trying to accomplish and how much you need the leaders to embody and be vulnerable and model it too is important.
And I want to say I don't work with those groups, but that's not reasonable. Anyway, and I get this from my sales coach, and there's Instapots, slow cookers, slow cookers, and slow cookers. And I have it also from my newer encoding coach, where sometimes you just have to be with the person as long as you can until they get the epiphany. So I find that coaching is very necessary to get to that. And sometimes the clients will say, you keep asking me the same questions. I'm like, I need you to discover this right now. And if they're willing to work in that way, that's the fun part of coaching, is that I see that that there is a change that happens with a lot of leaders. And yes, that slow cooker came to me, and now I'm facilitating their entire organization.
So what I'm hearing is patience. I just got to wear them out. Thank you. Thank you for all you do. Well, I want to be conscientious of time. I just want to thank you both for such a delightful conversation and just so many kernels of knowledge. And thank you for your kindness, leadership in the field as we explore this journey into the profession. I also want, last but not least, thank those that joined us today. Appreciate your interest and support in learning about exploring journey into profession for our careers in Peacebuilding Talk Story series.